first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for taking the time. And I would say that South Africa in general is a number of years behind America or Western culture in terms of informality. And so although the Western world is generally trending towards informality, both in terms of speaking, in terms of dress, in terms of lifestyle, South Africa lagged behind that, at least when I was growing up. And so there was a lot more of the formality which still existed. And so that might have been part of what it was. But I myself, I took it seriously. I enjoy the experience of speaking, of engaging, of being with people. And so, when I was younger, I took Toastmasters, which is an international speaking training, and learning different forms of public speaking. And I found that it was extremely helpful. And but most of the training that I did was actually in America when I entered SMICHA and I started working in the field and so on. So I wouldn't say it's the culture per se, but perhaps some of the more unique experiences of the individuals. Rael Blumenthal happens to be one of my closest friends. We grew up together, and he's a tremendous gift to the world. He's a very, very special person. And we grew up in a similar milieu with different backgrounds, though. And so part of my background sort of is the experience in shul. So I lost my father when I was 8 years old. So what happened was that the community banded together, and really, as Jewish communities only know how to do, they I had somebody picking me up at 6:15 every morning to take me to Minyan at the age of 8. So I was doing Kaddish for that full year, and then after that they were like, oh well, they made me like an unofficial gabbai. I took around the tzedakah box and opened up the locks and opened up the shul, and then I carried on going, and then when I became bar mitzvah, I was in a small shul. My rabbi was Rabbi Trump, who was the chief rabbi of South Africa, and so he pushed me to daven and then to lane, and then over time he gave me opportunities to speak. And so one thing kind of followed the next is that being forced into the public arena in that way actually gives one the capacity or to have to try to figure it out and get it better, no matter what the base is.
Yeah, I have two questions for you about that. Maybe share some of your experiences as a congregant listening to some of the drushas of Rabbi Trump. Did I pronounce his name right? Is that?
Yeah. So Rabbi Trump is a towering figure. Well over 6 feet. He grew up in I believe in Bnei Brak, went to Hebron in Yerushalayim, a dayan of tremendous stature, and was the Av Beis Din. So no, not the chief rabbi. I apologize. He was the Av Beis Din of South Africa, and so he was able. The communal leadership was a very big thing, and he was speaking. That wasn't his thing. It wasn't his. He would give direct Torah. It wasn't the formal pulpit as much. The chief rabbi, who was also very close to, lived a few blocks away, was Rabbi Cyril Harris, and he was a Glaswegian. And when he used to come, he was the master of the speaking, right? So he was sort of the formal speaker, and there was a lot to be gained from him, both in terms of the way that he'd present things. Rabbi Kurtzak, I have to be thankful for in so many ways, is that he pushed me to always do more, and he gave me the space and criticism and encouragement to develop myself, and he gave me that space. He wasn't a fancy person. He wasn't a showy person. He's not a person who needed to impress the world. He was doing more than most in terms of changing the community, holding the community together, and restructuring communal leadership. So when it came to Divrei Torah, he was more than gracious of giving me the space to be, and I'm forever grateful for that.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about Toastmasters. I'm so curious what you learned from that and how what they teach.
It was an interesting experience. I must have been, I think, early teens at that time, and it took a cohort of people, and we did, a weekly training. There are different types of speeches. So there's different types of engagements. There's impromptus. There's using props. There's pauses. There's different structure. There's improvisation. And so there are a lot of interesting skills. What was interesting to me is that for me, all of this made sense. I mean, the improv was a little definitely difficult, but all of this made sense. And what was interesting to see was how other people struggled. Like for a lot of people, this is not natural necessarily. But one of the things that I enjoy is learning from others. So watching other people speak is what allows me to. I get a lot of enjoyment while watching a good speaker, and I cringe when I watch somebody who's speaking down or just entertaining.
Sure. Do you who are some of your models when growing up? Who do you admire back then, now?
Yeah, there are lots of people. So, I mean, the truth is Mikol Melamdai Hiskalti. I've really gained a lot from all the people around me in my life. When I was young, we used to go for our vacation, or what's called holidays in South Africa, to during the summer to Cape Town. We used to stay in a place called Claremont, very, very beautiful shul there. And the rabbi, when I was growing up there, was a person by the name of Rabbi Ivan Lerner, actually an American. And he and his wife are really models of the rabbinate. They brought that professionalism into the rabbinate I've never seen before. Coming from the American professionalism in the rabbinate, and I'd never seen that level of professionalism. Every speech he came to, he had a folder, and everything was prepared. Everybody's names were laid out. You could see that everything that he did was with care and with poise. And for me, he always stood out to me as an example of what it meant to be prepared. It grates my nerves when I see people who get up there and don't know where to begin and don't know how to end, and then they insult the audience with some off-color joke at the beginning, as if the audience needs to is too unschooled to understand ideas, and so when you hear somebody like that speaking, that really inspired me, and that was really incredible. But then as I moved onwards, there were a lot of people as well. So in terms of there's just different departments of the rabbinate. So because I know you're focusing right now on speaking, happens to be there are different departments of the rabbinate. So I've learned lots from lots of people. This is specifically the speaking department, which is a very narrow part of the rabbinate. But I thought it was the rabbinate, but then I was disavowed of that when I entered the rabbinate. But the people that I gained a tremendous amount from watching in practice were people I always gained a tremendous amount from Rabbi Menachem Penna, who's the Dean of Reitz. Also, again, a tremendous amount of preparation, a tremendous amount of thought and investment. I gained a huge amount from Rabbi J.J. Schechter, who's a teacher of mine, and just in terms of being able to structure ideas. Most of speaking isn't about the speaking; it's about the flow of the speech, the content. The public speaking I received at YU through Brent Baer, Gerald August of blessed memory. People who really were masters in their field, and then I there's when I was in the YU Kollel in Chicago, learning from Rabbi Reuven Brand is a tremendous teacher, and in many ways, content and presentation. In presentation, the idea of different types of structures. So like the idea of what's called a shir, which is a layered cake, which is where you have an idea. And every next model that you're adding on, a little module, is expanding the idea. What's the value added to that idea? Or perhaps the idea of one tension, one idea, one question, which holds everything in tension. You need to put all the beads back to be able to close the loop. And that different structures of how ideas are structured was very helpful. One thing that he said to me in terms of my own personal growth was, he said to me, what are you an expert in? And I thought for a bit, and I said, I really like learning Tanakh. And he said, well, how much have you learned of that? And I said, I listed off 4 or 5 books, but there's more than 24, So, learning, if you want to speak, you have to know what you're talking about. So you can't just be repeating paragraphs of other people's ideas. You have to actually know what you're talking about. And so that was something which was also incredibly gainful. Those are just in the speaking realm. There's many other role models in so many other ways. Rabbi Hochberg was when I was an intern in Jamaica States as one of the kindest, most thoughtful caring and also sensitive people. I mean, knowing how to shape other people's lives in a meaningful way. So there's lots of models in different ways.
Yeah. I'm curious how you feel you've evolved in your speaking, not just the techniques and things like that, but just in terms of what your goals are, what you expect out of a drasha, what you maybe the ways you prepare, things like that. How have things changed since you began?
That's a great question. So here's the way I look at it. So when I started this whole business, I enjoyed speaking. So when I was given an opportunity to speak, I really enjoyed it. I enjoy taking an idea. I enjoy unpacking that idea and being able to convey it in a way that is compelling and in a way that people walk out with something. And I really gained that was my goal, and that's why I really joined the rabbinate, was to teach ideas, to make ideas tangible, to make them real, and it was a very rewarding experience. However, I've learned so much more from being in the field, really, to be honest, is in a way that's much more profound than I could have imagined. So I'll just a few points that I've thought about over time. One is just speed. Is that is slowing down speed, is sort of developing an idea more fully and comprehensively, rather than alluding to it. People don't always catch illusions fast enough. You have to just sort of slow the idea down at the same time. But one of the things that I guess I've gained over time is there's a few, I would say 2 points. One is where's the starting point of the idea? So it used to be that when I would prepare an idea, I would say, okay, I have an idea, or the parasha has an idea. I found an interesting insight. I would like to share this insight with you. I came across this article and it made me think. And so in a certain sense, I was the starting point of the idea, right? So it was what is speaking to me, and the passion therefore would overflow from that, which is a very beautiful way of doing it, and I imagine what most people do. But I think that over time I've come to ask from the other angle, which is, where are people at now? Meaning, what is on people's minds at this point in time? What are people struggling with? What are questions that are on the periphery of one's thought that one hasn't addressed yet? And when one starts from that perspective, I think one comes out to a very different end. So then one's actually, so to speak, giving voice, empathizing with the experience of others, and allowing the idea to frame that experience as well. And to me, that has reshaped the way I give a drasha or give a shir or so on. So, for instance, I did a project where I went through all of Nach, and when I would go through a parak in Tanakh, and I tried to figure out what is important to hit, like where do we start? So your average Tanakh teacher who in school, which we've all had, would say, okay, we're going to look at Pasuk Aleph, and we're going to look at the Rashi and the Radak and the Malbim, and we'll see that they have 3 different opinions about this. That's wonderful. And you can even be very passionate about that. But I would like to look at the parak as a whole and a holistic perspective, and ask the questions that stand out, like what doesn't make sense here, like what's sticking out. And if the questions are good enough, then the Mefarshim will have addressed them. But the majority, they are addressing a question which stands out to the reader, rather than trying to tell the reader what's important first. And that informs the way of drasha as well. And so a lot of times I'll just have to stop for myself, and instead of just sitting there intently finding Mefarshim that are interesting to me to share this week, I mean, like, what is, Jamal Bauman just lost the election last night, like, how does that impact the way we look at the world? The deadline for Hezbollah is today, the 26th of June. These are things that are on people's minds right now. How is that idea going to inform in the way that I was speaking? So I just think I would say starting with the reverse side of things is one very important a change of the way I look at things. So another thing which I think is also important is that I used to think that the speaking was the goal, right? Meaning I would always look at the rabbinate as this is, and I think most people do, because like the speaking is it. So, and that's how people interview rabbis, isn't it? Right? You bring over a nebuch, a rabbi and a rebbitzin, you make them speak 27 times in the span of 5 hours or whatever it is, and you have to speak to everybody in Q&A and this, and everybody then goes and votes, right? But to be honest, that's really a very small fraction of what the rabbinate is. If you think about it, the way I look at it is the rabbinate is divided into 4 silos. There's educator, which involves shirim and drashas. That's wonderful. But then there's also included in that there's also pastoral giver, which is essentially at the sickbed, at the funeral, at the bris, at the shalom zachar, not just of course, beforehand, and preparing people and helping people walk through so that the experience is meaningful by the time they get there. At the upshare, at the bat mitzvah, at the bar mitzvah, at the engagement, at the graduation, all the way through life, right? And that's a major role. Then there's the organizer. So today, for the better or the worse, in the modern community, the rabbi is doing a lot of the organizing, and yes, with office support, but that means to say the scholars in residence and the programs and the inspiration and the fundraising and all those pieces fall into place. And then the ambassador. The ambassador is sort of like the rabbi as representing the community. So whether it's a town hall meeting, or going to APAC or NORPAC missions, or missions to Israel, or meeting with public officials, and all these things are part of the ambassadorship. And I'll guarantee you that those last 3 categories take up way more space than the educator, which is ironic because you wanted to be the rabbi should be the educator, but the truth is that there's not so much time for education. The rabbi has to have a brilliant mind while doing all those other things, which really are their own departments. And in the real professional world, you would have those as separate jobs, actually. But the rabbi does all of them in this world. But part of it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that there's multiple tiers to the job. It's also the educator by itself doesn't actually work, which means to say that the notion that I'm going to speak and you're going to listen and you're going to change because I'm talking to you about something I'm passionate about is a fallacy. That most people do not change because of a good speech. They may be entertained by it. They may even enjoy the idea, but that's not going to change people. And that's why the rest of those pieces are important. Less so the ambassador or the organizer, but the pastoral certainly is people are only open to change at very narrow windows in their life. Right, that's either because they're intellectually honest and searching people all their life, and we all have amazing people like that around us who are always looking to grow. But for the vast majority of people, there are small windows in life, whether it's joy or pain, that people are that people are open to growth, and it's during those moments that ideas can make a difference. And so one is continually putting ideas out there, but at the same time as caring for those for people in a real way, as friends, as brothers, as sisters, in a way that's real, so that then while one is engaging and involved in a deep relationship with the community in a real way, in an authentic, genuine manner, then the ideas can penetrate. It always strikes me, the Kotzker Rebbe, it would say, why does it say that these matters should be on your heart? So he said, why isn't it in your heart? Why is it on your heart? And the preposition is incorrect. And his observation is that the heart most of the time is not open. The heart is closed. But what we do is we amass ideas on top of the heart so that when the heart opens, it'll ultimately be susceptible, be open to those ideas. And I believe that's what the rabbinate is. So the educating is important, and no doubt it has to be done professionally and well. But it would be a fallacy to think that that's what's moving the needle in people's lives necessarily.
Yeah, that's a consistent theme that I hear over and over again. People say that you can be a great pastor and a terrible speaker, but people put up with you, but not the other way around. If you don't care for the community, if you're not filling in those other silos, as you say, being a speaker is not going to carry it. So you said that you were disavowed of that. At what point did you understand this to be a truth?
Well, I guess, I look around the room and I see what people's lives. And for me, I ask the question is does it count? That's a question I ask for myself as well. Like when you're in, let's say, the for-profit sector, right? So you doing what you do and knowing it counts is much more easily measured, right? So you bill by the hour. you're salaried, and there's certain quarterly goals, right? Which are easy to make. And if you're in a business which is serious about itself and does these measures, then there are measures to see whether you're successful or not. And if you're not successful, either you'll just remain where you are or you'll lose your job, and that's it, right? But in the non-for-profit, in the space of the rabbinic teaching as well, the we'll call the matrix of growth, the matrix of mattering is very different, right? So you can't really necessarily view it in the same way, right? So that I think that's why a lot of times in this realm, it's one of the dangerous things is sort of the complement fishing, where where you so oftentimes see in the rabbinate, like people need other people's opinion as a sense of personal well-being to figure out if it's making a difference. That's a danger in this, because there's less markers of growth. For myself, I ask myself if it matters, and the question that the way to measure that is are there tangibly different ways that people are living, right? Are the people who I'm trying to speak to and converse with and engage with, are they living differently? Does the idea matter enough beyond the end of the speech? So therefore, when somebody would say, I repeat your ideas at the Shabbos table, right? They're a topic of discussion. So my response to that is, if it's worth repeating, it's worth saying. So that to me is one important thing. Is the idea worth repeating? Is one question. But then also in terms of lifestyle, slowly, somebody came over to me and said, I stopped wearing shorts to Shachris during the week, because when you talked about on Pashat Tzitzav, the value of clothes and how we view ourselves, that's a tangible measure of growth, right? But it happens to be that person who's at that moment, that window in their life of openness to the way that they were thinking about things. So I guess I've been more sensitive to the question is, I'm investing all this time into it, but there's no measure. We're not sending out surveys like, did you do anything different because of this drasha? Because also the conceptualization of the drasha is incorrect. So if you'll ask your average person, how did the rabbi speak? I say, oh, great speech today, Rabbi. And everybody loves to get compliments and so on, but that's not the point. I'm not interested in the entertainment value, which is what you're essentially saying, right? So I'm interested in not was it good for you to listen to, but is it meaningful to change the way you look at life? Now, it can't be a grand slam every week, right? But the point is that I'll turn that question back on people, and I'll say, a great drasha. I'll say, well, it's only as great as it changes you. Or the jury's out. Is it great? You'll tell me in a week's time. Did you do anything about it? Right? That's the question I would like to ask. And so over time, I become more sensitive to this, because otherwise, it's really just entertainment, right? And I'm not here for entertainment. I mean, it's great and it's important, and the tools, like you mentioned in the entertainment industry, are necessary tools to do this well. But that's not how I'm measuring the imports of this important work.
Yeah, you talked a little bit earlier about trying to understand where people are at, where their headspace is at, and what they're thinking about, and starting from that point, and then going into the parsha. What happens if you can't find anything? You know what people are thinking, but it does not fit the parsha somehow. It feels contrived, or what do you do on those Shabbos?
So good. So first of all, I'm also just one of the things I really believe, like in my bones, is the note that what Pirkei Avos says, which is Mikom lamda ezil chacham ha'lamed mikol adam. And I was tremendously moved by this. I remember when I was reading Rabbi Sachs's Morality, he quotes Rav Kook on that Mishnah, who points out it should be obvious that what the Mishnah is saying. What the Mishnah is telling us at the beginning of the fourth parak there is that wisdom is not to be found in one individual or even in one culture. You can't find all ideas in one place or in one person. And that means to say that if a person wants to really be wise, they have to be able to listen to others, because that's where wisdom is found, crowdsourced in a sense. Wisdom is crowdsourced, right? And so the more one listens, the more one is engaged. And the truth is that most of the best ideas that I've had the opportunity of delivering are not because I sat there in my tower, pondering like the philosopher on the rock, It's because I've engaged in conversation with rabbis, with people in the community. It's more actually preparing for the drasha is more about listening to people than it is about thinking and producing. And that to me is an incredibly important tool in terms of being able to converge ideas that are heard. So if there's not enough, I mean, if I'm not getting to that idea, the question then is to speak to people, actually, to hear where people are at, and to hear where other rabbanim are at and their perspectives on these unique situations. I always find it amazing. I find it, there's this old game which is never loses its touch, is called Boggle, right? You know the Boggle. You have the, I don't know how many, it's 25 little blocks with different letters, and you shake them up, and then everybody has to find words, and you try to get words which are unique. And I always find it amazing. Like after 3 minutes, you end the game, and you got a list of 25 words, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And somebody else has got another 25 words altogether, and you're like, you didn't realize that looking at the same constellation of letters, there was all that there, because their creative experience and their creative process is completely different. So for me, it's really about listening and merging ideas into reality, which I think is incredibly important, an important piece about this as well. In lieu of that as well, I also believe that it's important to have other people speak as well, which means to say is that everybody, a shul, when people say, the shul is an amazing place, there's so much going on. If it were to be one person doing all that, well, that one person's limited. That one person only has 24 hours in the day, and they may work 7 days a week, but there's only 24 hours in the day. Great programming doesn't come from one person thinking about great programming the same way. Great programming, like the speech, comes from great listening. So if one listens to the community and what people are doing amazing things. Like, there are really incredibly great people doing amazing things in the community. And it's important to be able to not just listen to them, but also give them the platform, right? So a little bit of what we're doing, interviews, I try to do interviews with folks, whether it's at Soda Shlishos or in the long Shabbos afternoons. Why? Because there's so much value. This person just came back from Austria, just did this experience. This person led a mission to Washington. This person, there's so much to create that conversation, which I think is so important, because that's where wisdom really lies, is listening.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about entertainment stories. I know I get the sense that it's clearly not the goal, but how do you use it as maybe a kli? Do you use it? What do you lean towards? Some people tell jokes, some people tell stories, some people have different ways of a hook. What are some of your methods for capturing people's attention, keeping them engaged?
Great question. That's I enjoy this. This to me is just something which I sort of naturally feel, something I naturally gravitate towards, and that is I'll put in stages. When I was growing up, one of the pastimes I had was I used to do magic shows. So you mentioned you did stand-up comedy. I used to do magic shows for kids. So when I was an early teenager, I would do parties for kids, and so when one does a show, when one is guiding the attention and energy of the audience, right, all the time, right? So you're working with a certain amount of energy. You know where that energy is going. You know how to build up tension. You know how to release the tension, and you have sort of the reveal, which is where you bring everybody's there's distraction, and there's all the different components necessary to bring people to that to that goal. And it's very gratifying to be able to do it right, to be able to sort of guide people's energy through a process. And so the same works with speaking, as you well know, which is that people come in with a certain amount of energy. And whether that energy is at sort of neutral level, or that you're trying to now engage, you want them clicked in to an idea. It could be a 10-minute ride, it could be a 45-minute ride, depending on what the slot is, and depending on did they opt in or they just there. A drasha is a captivated audience, a shir is a self-selected audience, so they're dealing with different types of energy there. But as one's moving that, then one has to figure out is everything I'm saying is taking energy. It's kind of like the calories that are being consumed naturally during the day. So I'm saying things which are naturally taking away people's energy. So how am I pulling that energy up in order to be able to hold them through this process, right? So therefore, just saying things and just throwing in things and putting in tangents is wasting their energy. And there's going to be people just going to fall off while I turn the corner over there, because it's irrelevant. So how am I guiding that? So Rabbi J.J. Shechter used to have the structure that he used to operate with that he taught us was just fascinating, which is the H, right? So his famous which I always think about is you draw two lines in the drasha and then you connect them at the end, right? So you one idea and you switch tracks without explaining why you're switching tracks. People are left sort of wondering why you're talking about that. Develop another idea, then connect the two, and they answer each other. That's one methodology. But there's other ways of doing it as well, right? So a really pertinent question is creates the tension, which now gives one enough, so to speak, gas of to get through a few ideas. So when one starts with a really strong question, the tension's created. Now one starts with a new idea or a story or an illustration of an idea, and which has nothing to do with it, clicks back into answering that question and then illustrates it to bring it home. Now we're talking. Now we have a compelling idea, right? And similarly in a shir, I used to fall into the trap of these long, extensive source sheets with lots of words on them. People aren't reading. Just look around. They're just not reading. They're not interested, right? On average, there is one academic at the back of the room who's going to take the source sheets and it's fantastic. They're not doing that because you're asking somebody to read. You're asking them to give energy, right? They're just going to fall asleep. They're going to fall off. You want to just say it all in Hebrew for the sake of giving you more time to say it and impress people that you know how to read it. They don't care. That's not value added, right? So therefore a source has to be introduced with all the ideas leading up to the relevance of it, with one key line, maybe accentuated, maybe to be able to drive that point home, because that's the key line. But just to read through voluminous ideas is not going to help you in a shir as well. So to me, it's sort of cultivating the tension necessary for the release, so that one arrives at a crescendo of where the idea is so compelling that one walks out and one says, "Wow, that was it. I get it. That it made sense. There's a reason." And so it's using those tools in that way in a relevant way, which to me is there's no greater joy than doing that right. And there's no greater failure than doing it wrong. And so that to me is where it's at. That's why I love doing it very, very much, even though people might not realize.
I've never heard it phrased that way. With that's such a great example of the calories that they're losing energy. Everything that you expend on them, they're losing energy by the second, and you got to keep them energized. And that's so interesting. So what are some of the ways that you talked about illustrations, and where do you have any go-tos or resources that you go to look for ideas to illustrate your point? Do you collect stories? Do you curate stories?
I used to collect stories, and whenever I come across a great story, I'd sort of put it away. And I used to use Evernote. Now I use OneNote. All the tricks they used to say about the rabbis, that if the rabbis walking the street and it's Joshua worthy, then it happens, and if it didn't, it's not Joshua worthy, then it never existed. So we sort of spend our lives sort of searching for stories. And at a certain point, cynically, I used to say to myself, "Oh my gosh, I'm just like a glorified storyteller," right? But then I realized that actually stories itself are the most compelling way of transmitting ideas. And whether it's because people are lulled into a sense of like the storytelling, and they're engaged because they're wanting the next idea. There's less energy necessary to get through a story than there is to get through an idea, as compelling as the idea would be. And so I actually, as opposed to thinking about cynically, now I realize that a story actually is the vehicle of transmitting a compelling idea in a way that's relevant. Now, just to clarify, the rabbi who gets up and says some sort of stupid joke at the beginning of the drasha, just because they're going to say it, and then they give another idea which has got nothing to do with it. There's nothing more insulting than that, right? So it just saying something for the sake of saying it because one heard a good story or a good joke is just an insult. But we're talking about a story which conveys a message. But I'd say it's more than that, and this is what I've coming to realize myself. Is that we actually live by stories. So that means to say is that we tell ourselves a story about our life. So we go through life and we experience millions of experiences or sensory experiences and emotional, spiritual, psychological, physical experiences. And what we do is we look backwards and we tell ourselves a story about putting all those pieces together. And not all of them, but the pieces that matter in the narrative that we tell ourselves. And a lot of times the problem in life is when we tell ourselves the wrong story. We're focusing on the negative, or we're focusing on the bad. We need to retell ourselves that story. So in a certain sense, our own lives is a story. And we click in when we hear other people's stories, which help us reshape the way we tell our story, which gives us meaning as to how we will live beyond this. And so a story is the most compelling way to convey these ideas, which means to say is that as opposed to always searching, I find that it's important to actually just to be listening and experiencing. I'm walking through the streets, and the way people drive, the way people talk, is informing me that I'm living an experience of values. So wherever I go, I'm sensitive to what's going on, and that helps me inform me. And sometimes it doesn't have to be this profound story about the guy who reached the top of Mount Everest and then his Sherpa died, but he managed to get down, and like those crazy kinds of stories. I love them and everything, but it's also just about regular people also cross the street and experience the same issues as I am. And let's make relevant by throwing in those pieces of regular day-to-day life in a human way, in a very real way. So that to me is the most is very tangible. Me and you, let's go through it. But then of course there's also just other pieces which are props, which is just like so relevant. Is just introducing things, So if you're gonna represent a dialogue, use different voices and stand in different places. Have two lecterns, to do this. If you talk about Aseret Debros, they're usually right behind you, right? So try to figure out where it is. If it's going to be in a stained window that's in any part of the shul, then walk over to it. Again, we're limited in terms of the space where we occupy, but there's so many ways to make it much more relevant. Whether it's what one wears, how one says it, the voice one says it in. There's what one shows. These are really incredibly compelling and memorable pieces as well. So in terms of the props, which make a difference. So these are some of the things. And when it comes to, let's say, in terms of the props as well, is like the source sheet is going to augment. So if you're doing AV, let's say it's during the week, is the idea augmented by the picture as well. So we used to have as resident scholar in our shul, Dr. Henry Abramson, for 6 years. And then he moved to, he's now the Dean of Landers, and he just moved to Fairlawn, New Jersey. Whenever you give a class, it was really, really excellent. He would have these slideshows, and the picture, he would never have text. So maybe there would be a slide text there, but he wouldn't read the text. But the picture would augment or in certain sense satirize what he was saying. So how are the props, so to speak, reframing what one's doing as opposed to just saying? Like, there's nothing more terrible than going to a conference and having a person who has a PowerPoint slide with 7 points that they read once they're showing it to you. I'm perfectly capable of reading. I really don't want you to read it to me right now. You're wasting my energy, right? But if you're going to tell me something and the picture or the graph you're showing is now supplementing, augmenting, or criticizing what you're saying, now we're talking, right? But the point is, it has to be compelling. So these are pieces that are necessary in addition to, of course, the speech itself.
Yeah. How much of yourself do you share in your when you speak? Personal anecdotes, feelings, challenges, struggles, things like that.
It's always a struggle to find the right balance, because the more real one is, the more people relate to it. But then at the same time, it's also opening oneself up. The rabbinate is always a very public experience, and people will always misinterpret or misunderstand things as well. And so it's a very, very fine balance. I try to avoid family references. I try to avoid, I'll talk about my kids in general, but I'm not going to go into, so to speak, because they don't deserve the aftermath comments. And so that's one area I try to avoid. And it's the same thing professionally. So like, my Facebook account is for my professional, my social media is for my professional things. So family doesn't appear in that. But personal experience of what I went through and what I'm feeling personally, I will share. I was like really disappointed this last week that X happened. I was confused. There was just an election, and I felt like really like conflicted by like what was going on about two candidates shaming each other. Like I'm like I'll share our process. I'll be very real about that. But I think I'll keep the family out of it. I think is an important part, because if one's just simply an intellectual, academic, then people don't relate to that. But it has to be real. But that comes at a loss. I'll give you an example. So I've had chronic back pain shoulder pain for like years and years and years. And I went through all the different methods of dealing with it, and nothing really helped. But in the process, I gained a tremendous amount of a much healthier lifestyle, a much healthier sleeping style, much healthier eating style, more exercise, more stretches, more mindfulness, all the good things. So I still have it, but I'm a better person, right? So I once shared that, and for the people, like as an idea, that's a personal experience, right? So, and the idea was not to talk about back pain, but was to talk about the pain that we have in life, and how the pain may not necessarily even go away, but we become better because of the way we deal with it. Right? That was the message, and sort of expanded in a more expansive, and that's a very personal thing. But then, of course, like, it kills me afterwards, and someone comes and says, Rabbi, I got a great chiropractor for you. I'm like, okay, you clearly did not get what I was talking about, right? So that's always the danger of sharing, is that people just. And then people, like, for years later will say, "Oh, Rabbi, I don't want you to carry that because I know you got back pain." It's like that really wasn't the point, right? You just clearly missed the boat there. So, but it's obviously coming from a good place, not, but when one shares personally, one has essentially opened oneself up to the misinterpretation or the just sort of the limited interpretation of the greater audience, which comes with its risks. But I think it's still usually worth it.
Yeah. Tell me some. You said that, when you do it right, there's nothing better, and when you fail to do that, there's nothing worse. Do any highs or lows stick out in your mind through your speaking career? Any? I find that there are people that draw chizik from that we didn't just land on a mountaintop. We climbed up here, and there were stumbles and things like that. Are there any situations that stick out in your mind that as growth, not just gratuitous, but as for growth purposes?
Yes. So it's always I really enjoy one of the highlights of the year has always been the Shabbos program. We have a very, very impressive balabas, a member in our community, puts efforts into it, makes it his task to do this, and he, to his credit, this last year we had 700 people learning all night. It's amazing, kids, adults. It was really an amazing experience. And this year I did a little differently, but in the past what I did was I would speak all through the night, and so we talk about a 5-hour slot. And the way I did it was, again, working with energy, is choosing a theme, and then subdividing. The shir would be on the hour for 45 to 50 minutes, but subdividing each shir into 3 sections. So let's say that, I think we, like, as an example, let's say the topic was transformation. So I took 4 eras of transformation, and then took 3 individuals in each of those eras and their transformative story and their learning, right? So therefore, essentially, it wasn't, besides the introductory share, which is its own, so to speak, compelling. At that point, people are able to listen. But then we're essentially talking about 3 micro shirim every hour, right? So then that means to say I'm creating platforms for people to get on again once they've, so to speak, maybe been the caboose that went backwards. So now they can get back on. And so, like, it was very gratifying to get to 4:45 a.m. and have a full room of people, and have people who are able to, because that means to say that method worked, right? So it's very gratifying for that. Other pieces of it there is just like, sometimes it'll be just like a share that is given and is so compelling that people will just clap afterwards. They can't help themselves, and that is always very gratifying, even though it's not like that was not the point. But that means to say that it landed properly. It landed well. I have a guy who's a very gracious person, who's a doctor who used to be the head of a hospital in Brooklyn, and very, very wonderful person. And he always comes up afterwards. He said, "Rabbi Trump, that was just a great drasha." So I always say to him, "Chaim, how do I know when it's not a good drasha?" I feel like whenever I speak to you, it's always compliments. So he says, it always is a good drasha. He says, but when it's not great, then I don't come up. And so that's sort of my helpful benchmark. But then there's times where I guess where I wasted the energy, or just, it didn't end well, didn't land well. And then you see people like sort of just looking around or falling asleep or missing the point. And then you just wasted their time and you wasted your time. It wasn't prepared well enough. And it's a loss. It's a loss. I remember one time I was in the middle of a drasha, and there's a fellow who was sitting there the entire drasha, his legs crossed, his arms folded, and shaking his head the whole time, you know. And so at the end of the drasha, I went over to him and I said, I see that was something I said obviously didn't jive. Are you willing? I'm happy to discuss it with you. And he said, no, I prefer not to. Which essentially means I prefer to discuss what you at the Shabbos table when you don't have the opportunity of defending yourself, or explaining. But the point is that those are the kinds of things that happen from time to time, and one has to have that because there's a wide audience. But when there's sort of a speak, the energy closes and there's like this sort of this hanging silence for the moment afterwards, then one knows one's arrived at the right place.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where there was someone while I was speaking, he was shaking his head the whole time, and it was so rude and disconcerting, and it was so hard not to focus past him and just keep on going. And then afterwards, he came up to me and he goes, "That was the best shiur I've ever heard." And he had some head affect that was causing him to move his head like that. But it was my first time addressing that audience. And I thought that he was just, being overly negative, but he was actually enjoying what he was hearing. So it always made me, you can misread people's facial expressions, their head nods, that you don't have to take it so personally.
It's actually interesting because one of the things I've noticed, and this is actually I spoke about on Rosh Hashanah because of the topic is the power of bad. There's a book by Charles Baumeister called The Power of Bad, and it's how we are naturally wired to notice bad more than good. So you can have a whole audience of people who are all engaged, and there's one person doing that shaking their head, and it demands much more attention than anybody else. And it's a sad thing. It's not the way it should be. But our focus is, in a certain sense, on that, whereas the vast majority, 66% of the silent majority, are going to walk out without saying anything, actually appreciated it. And the really good people's compliments will not overshadow the negative person's comment, but it's important to recontextualize it. That's very, very hard. Like, because as you said, like when you're sitting there watching that, your energy, in a certain sense, you keep turning back and you say, did I say something wrong? And you're going back in your mind while you're trying to go forward, right? It's very disturbing.
Yeah. There's a book. On the flip side of it, there's a book called, I think it's a famous book. It's called Learned Optimism, where you actually have to relearn. You're hardwired for pessimism, and you have to actually kum va'aseh. You actually have to learn optimism. So maybe I'll end with this. I always ask at the end 2 pieces of advice that you would give a new emerging rabbi. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the arena of speaking, but you want to set him up for success. He's going out, embarking on his career. What are the 2 most primary important pieces of advice that you would give to set him up for success?
There's a lot of things I would think about. One is just listen to others. Rabbis unfortunately rarely get to listen to other rabbis, just because the time they would be able to listen to them is the time they're engaged in teaching. I gain so much pleasure going and when I have a Shabbos off and going to somebody else's shul and sitting in the back and just listening. And there's always something I gain. There's always something I gain from other people. It is so important to be able to listen and to listen to masters. Like, I gain so much when I used to go to APAC policy conference. And you watch really good speakers, people who are compelling speakers. I actually gain enjoyment just seeing their skills in action. You can get the goosebumps when you see how good some of these speakers are. Really, really excellent speakers. And other is creating a dialogue for feedback as well. If it's going to be like this, you're this performer, you go up on the stage and you do your thing and you go back to the wings afterwards, then it's like, in a certain sense, it's us, them, it's the performance, the accolades, and there is an element of that, but it's important that the drasha is part of the conversation as well. Which means to say is that the relationships which are built before and the relationships are built afterwards are honest enough that one can have people who can critique, who can reframe in a way that's meaningful. And I think it's important to be able to listen to others doing it well and also to listen to others who are watching one and ask others for critiques, because otherwise we're just going to keep doing the same things, whether they're good, parav, or bad. And it's really important to have that dialogue built in.
Just on that last note, how would you advise someone who maybe has, when you're starting out, you have a little bit of a thinner skin, and you're maybe, it's hard to hear that criticism and maybe negative feedback in the beginning. How would you advise someone to maybe equip themselves or reframe what they're hearing so it doesn't sound personal or threatening to them?
Yeah, so I would just say don't do it right afterwards, is because I guess immediately after you speak is the time that you're most sensitive to how it went down, and that's a time when a criticism can be most difficult. But let's say one has the space, so it's that evening, it's the next day. You reach out and you say, "Listen, I'd love to just hear what you thought about that. Did you think that it was compelling? Did you feel that it addressed the issue in the right way? Do you think people were engaged?" And you have one or two people that and it could be one spouse, it could be a mentor, it could be a trusted community member, a person who's really got one's back. But with that space, I think we're all able to view it in a little more objective light as well, without
Yeah.
the personal investment feeling slighted, as we all do, because we put our souls on the line to show, and that's a very sensitive thing, and it's worth it. It makes a difference. But at the same time, there comes the vulnerability that's necessary for that change to happen.
Yeah, I used to tell my wife Wednesday she could talk to me on Wednesday. That's how much. Uh, Let me ask you: is there anywhere that if people want to learn more about you, learn more about the shul, any projects that you're working on, is there anywhere that we can point them?
Well, there's so many wonderful things that are going on. But one project I'm really proud of is recently completed a project called Tanakh Yomi, where I went through every chapter of Tanakh, and then with podcasts and every Ali on the Torah and every Haftarah, and so I created the app for that called Tanakh Yomi, which is awesome. So that the methodology also is embedded in that as well. And then in terms of community itself, then there's a ton going on just on the shul's website, yilk.org. In terms of like communal engagement, a lot of it's actually happening in-house. It's not necessarily public facing. It's more internal facing. But one of the things I'm trying to work on is podcasts and like just turning ideas into series, right? So it's a series which I engage with as well. So just finishing a crash course of Jewish life cycle, just finished a what and why of prayer. Like there are a lot of different pieces that I'm trying to put out there, and I'm definitely interested in feedback, thoughts, and perspectives. There's the next project coming up, Halacha, in a year. So there's a lot of different projects hoping to unroll. The same goal is taking very complex information